When the first Pontiac GTO appeared in 1964, few could predict that it would come to symbolize an entire generation of American performance cars. The GTO was not born in a boardroom or as part of a marketing survey. It was conceived in the garages and engineering offices of Pontiac by a small group of passionate men who wanted to inject excitement back into American automobiles. At the time, General Motors had a corporate policy limiting engine displacement in midsize cars to 330 cubic inches. Pontiac engineers John DeLorean, Bill Collins, and Russ G. decided to quietly break that rule by dropping a 389 cubic inch V8 from the larger Pontiac Bonneville into the smaller, lighter Pontiac Tempest chassis. This act of rebellion gave birth to one of the most iconic muscle cars in history. The concept was simple yet revolutionary. Take a midsize car, install a large and powerful engine, tune the suspension, and give it an aggressive image. The result was explosive. The 1964 Pontiac GTO, available as a $295 option package on the Tempest Le Mans, came with the 389 V8 producing 325 horsepower with a 4-barrel carburetor, or 348 horsepower with the optional tri-power setup using 3 2-barrel Rochester carburetors. It offered a choice of a 3-speed manual transmission, a 4-speed manual, or an automatic. It was not only about raw power. The GTO package also included upgraded suspension components, dual exhausts, a special hood scoop, and distinctive badging that separated it from the ordinary Tempest. Pontiac marketing, led by Jim Wongers, understood that they were selling more than a car. They were selling attitude, rebellion, and speed. The name GTO, borrowed from Ferrari's 250 GTO, stood for Gran Turismo Omologato, meaning a grand touring car homologated for racing. Though Pontiac's GTO had nothing to do with European racing homologation, the name itself captured the imagination of young American buyers who associated it with exotic performance. The car quickly became a sensation, especially among the younger crowd who were just beginning to explore the growing car culture of the 1960s. Pontiac expected to sell around 5,000 GTOs in 1964. Instead, they sold over 32,000, completely surpassing expectations and proving that the American public was hungry for affordable performance. The success forced General Motors to rethink its restrictions and encouraged competitors like Chevrolet, Ford, and Dodge to respond with their own muscle cars. The GTO effectively opened the floodgates for the muscle car era that would dominate the rest of the decade. Technically, the 389 cubic inch V8 was a robust and well-engineered power plant. With a cast-iron block, hydraulic lifters, and high-flow cylinder heads, it was capable of revving higher and sustaining power under heavy loads. The tri-power setup, with 3 2-barrel carburetors, delivered fuel more efficiently across different engine speeds, giving the GTO excellent throttle response and a signature induction sound. This setup required careful tuning, but when adjusted properly, it transformed the GTO into a street rocket. The combination of power and relatively light weight for its class gave the car acceleration figures that rivaled some of the more expensive sports cars of the time. In 1965, Pontiac refined the formula further. The body of the Tempest and Le Mans was redesigned with a more aggressive, streamlined look, featuring stacked headlights and a more muscular stance. The 389 engine remained, but its power was bumped up slightly, and the tri-power option continued to be a favorite among performance enthusiasts. The GTO also received an improved suspension and wider tires, enhancing handling stability. Pontiac's advertising proudly called it the Tiger, reinforcing its image as a ferocious street machine. The public responded with enthusiasm once again, pushing sales to over 75,000 units, solidifying the GTO's dominance. Inside the 1965 GTO, drivers were greeted with a cockpit designed to convey sportiness. The dashboard featured a full set of gauges, a wood-grain steering wheel, and bucket seats that provided a more engaging driving experience than the typical American car of the time. Even though the car was designed for straight-line performance, Pontiac engineers worked to balance ride comfort and handling, using stiffer springs, heavy-duty shock absorbers, and a rear stabilizer bar. This attention to mechanical detail made the GTO more than just a straight-line bruiser. It was a genuinely capable performer for spirited driving. The 1966 model year marked an important milestone for the GTO, as it became a separate model line rather than just an option package. The car's design evolved with the times, featuring a Coke bottle body shape, which gave it a more sculpted and aerodynamic appearance. The stacked headlights were replaced by horizontal units, and the split front grille became more pronounced, giving the car a bolder and more aggressive face. Under the hood, the 389 engine continued to power the GTO, but Pontiac offered a new optional Ram Air package that included a special camshaft, revised carburetor, and functional hood scoop to improve airflow to the engine. These modifications made the GTO faster and more responsive, especially in quarter-mile runs, where times in the low 14-second range were possible, a serious performance figure for the era. Pontiac's engineers were constantly refining the car's mechanical systems. The standard 3-speed manual transmission was gradually phased out in favor of the more popular 4-speed and automatic options, which were better suited to the torque curve of the 389 engine. The clutch and gear linkage were strengthened to handle the higher torque output, while the differential received a limited slip option, allowing drivers to put down power more effectively during acceleration. These details showed Pontiac's commitment to maintaining the GTO's performance reputation as competition in the muscle car market intensified. By 1967, the GTO was at the height of its fame, and Pontiac decided to make several important changes. The 389 engine was replaced with a larger 400 cubic inch V8, reflecting the industry's increasing displacement race. The base version produced 335 horsepower, while the optional high-output, HO, and Ram Air versions offered up to 360 horsepower. The 400 engine used improved cylinder heads, a higher lift camshaft, and a larger 4-barrel carburetor, enhancing both torque and top-end performance. To complement the new engine, Pontiac introduced front disc brakes as an option for the first time, recognizing that a car capable of such speeds needed better stopping power. The 1967 GTO also featured improved safety and drivability. The introduction of a dual-circuit braking system, energy-absorbing steering column, and revised suspension geometry made the car more controllable at high speeds. The interior continued to evolve, with new materials and design updates reflecting the luxury performance blend Pontiac was aiming for. The GTO was no longer just a street racer, it was now a symbol of sophisticated American performance engineering. Pontiac also experimented with limited high-performance versions and dealer-installed upgrades. Some dealerships, particularly Royal Pontiac in Michigan, offered tuned versions of the GTO with modified camshafts, rejetted carburetors, and optimized ignition timing. These cars often achieved performance figures far above factory specifications, sometimes running the quarter-mile in the high 13-second range, remarkable performance for a full-bodied production car in the 1960s. However, as the late 1960s progressed, competition in the muscle car market became fierce. Chevrolet introduced the Chevelle SS396, Dodge launched the Charger and Coronet R/T, and Ford had the Fairlane and Mustang GT. Pontiac knew the GTO had to evolve again to stay on top. The 1968 model represented a major transformation, both mechanically and stylistically. The GTO moved to GM's new A-body platform with a shorter wheelbase and more curvaceous body lines. It featured a new Endura front bumper made of a flexible urethane material that could absorb minor impacts without denting, an innovation that would influence automotive design for years. The Endura bumper was color-matched to the body and gave the front of the GTO a seamless, modern appearance. The 1968 GTO also offered a range of powerful engines, from the base 400 V8 with 350 horsepower to the Ram Air 1 and 2 variants producing up to 366 horsepower. The Ram Air engines featured functional hood scoops that directed cool air directly into the carburetor, increasing performance during acceleration. The suspension geometry was improved with new control arms and bushings, resulting in better handling and ride quality compared to earlier models. The car's reduced size and improved aerodynamics made it even more agile on the road, reinforcing its reputation as the leader of the muscle car pack. The engineering behind the 400 V8 reflected Pontiac's deep understanding of performance tuning. The cylinder heads were redesigned with larger valves and improved port flow, allowing the engine to breathe more efficiently. The compression ratios varied between 10.5 to 1 and 10.75 to 1 depending on the version, ensuring strong power delivery across the rev range. The Ram Air system not only improved top-end power but also gave the engine a unique induction sound that became instantly recognizable to enthusiasts. Pontiac engineers continued to focus on drivetrain refinement as well. The available transmissions included a close-ratio 4-speed manual and the robust turbo-hydromatic 400 automatic. A safe T-track limited-slip differential became a popular option, allowing both rear wheels to deliver power evenly, especially useful during drag races or high-performance driving. The braking system, though still primarily drum-based, could be upgraded with front discs, which significantly improved stopping distances. By 1969, the GTO had firmly established itself as the benchmark for American muscle cars. Pontiac continued to innovate, introducing the optional Ram Air 3 and 4 engines, the latter being the most advanced and powerful version yet, rated at 370 horsepower. The Ram Air 4 engine featured round-port cylinder heads, a high-lift camshaft, forged pistons, and a high-flow intake manifold, making it a true performance powerhouse. These cars were capable of astonishing acceleration and were often used as the basis for drag racing builds. The 1969 model year also saw the introduction of the now famous Judge package, a high-performance, visually striking version of the GTO designed to compete with the Plymouth Roadrunner. But even before the Judge arrived, the standard 1969 GTO was already an icon of speed and engineering. By the end of the 1960s, the Pontiac GTO had become more than just a car, it was a cultural symbol. It represented power, rebellion, and American ingenuity. Yet the environment that had allowed it to flourish was beginning to change. Rising insurance costs, growing safety and emissions regulations, and the first signs of the fuel crisis were beginning to put pressure on the muscle car market. Pontiac, however, was not ready to surrender. For 1969, they doubled down on performance and image, creating what would become one of the most legendary versions of the GTO, the Judge. The GTO Judge was introduced in January 1969 as a response to the success of the Plymouth Roadrunner, which had proven that affordable performance with a bold attitude could sell in large numbers. Pontiac wanted something equally distinctive. The Judge was originally planned as a stripped-down, budget-friendly model, but it evolved into a full-fledged performance package with striking looks and formidable power. It featured bold graphics, a rear spoiler, unique badging, and was often painted in bright colors such as carousel red. Under its Endura front bumper sat the standard Ram Air 3 400 cubic inch V8 engine producing 366 horsepower, with the even more powerful Ram Air 4 as an option, rated at 370 horsepower but known to produce closer to 410 in real-world testing. The Ram Air 4 was a technical marvel for its time. It used high-flow round-port cylinder heads, a high-lift camshaft with solid lifters, forged pistons, and a specially tuned intake manifold. These features gave the engine incredible breathing capacity at high RPM, allowing the GTO to achieve performance numbers that few production cars could match. The functional hood scoops channeled cool, dense air directly into the carburetor, further enhancing combustion efficiency. Mated to a close-ratio Muncie 4-speed manual transmission and a 3.90-to-1 safe T-track rear differential, the Ram Air 4 GTO could sprint through the quarter-mile in the low 13-second range at over 105 miles per hour, a truly astonishing figure for a car weighing nearly 3,800 pounds. The suspension was tuned for maximum traction, with stiffer springs, heavy-duty shocks, and an anti-roll bar. Despite being designed primarily for straight-line acceleration, the GTO Judge handled corners better than most muscle cars of its era, thanks to its well-balanced chassis and wide track. The combination of power, style, and engineering precision made it one of the definitive performance machines of the late 1960s. However, the success of the GTO and the entire muscle car movement was beginning to attract unwanted attention. Insurance companies started classifying these high-horsepower models as high-risk, dramatically increasing premiums for younger buyers, the same demographic that had made the GTO a success. At the same time, new federal safety and emission standards were being enforced, requiring lower compression ratios and the use of exhaust gas recirculation systems. These factors combined to change the muscle car landscape completely. For 1970, Pontiac increased displacement once again to maintain performance despite lower compression ratios. The new 455 cubic inch V8 became available, producing 360 horsepower in standard form and up to 370 in the optional HO version. The engine produced tremendous torque, exceeding 500 lb-ft at low RPM, giving the GTO remarkable acceleration from a stop. Although the peak horsepower figures were no longer climbing dramatically, the broader torque curve made the car more usable in everyday driving. The 1970 GTO also received subtle styling changes, including a revised front end with twin grilles and slightly reshaped body lines that emphasized width and presence. Inside, the car maintained its driver-oriented layout, but now with more emphasis on comfort and refinement. Air conditioning, power windows, and an upgraded stereo system were becoming more common options, signaling the slow shift from pure performance to a more luxurious image. In 1971, the muscle car era faced its greatest challenge yet. The introduction of low-lead gasoline and new emissions requirements forced manufacturers to reduce engine compression ratios drastically. The GTO's 400 and 455 engines saw their compression ratios drop to around 8.2 to 1, resulting in lower power ratings. The 400 now produced 300 horsepower, and the 455 HO, while still powerful, was rated at 335 horsepower. Though the numbers seemed disappointing on paper, the engines still delivered impressive real-world performance due to their high torque output. The 1971 model also featured a more rounded body with a divided front grille and integrated bumper design. Pontiac engineers worked hard to retain the GTO's handling prowess despite the heavier emissions equipment and safety reinforcements. The suspension geometry was revised, and front disc brakes became standard equipment. The car still drove with authority, but the raw, unfiltered aggression of the 1960s models was beginning to fade. Pontiac offered a special 455 HO engine that attempted to recapture the glory of earlier years. This engine used a functional ram air system, aluminum intake manifold, and high-flow round-port heads similar to those used on the Ram Air 4. Although its advertised rating was lower due to new SAE net horsepower measurement standards introduced in 1972, the real performance was comparable to earlier GTOs. This engine provided the 1971 and 1972 GTOs with serious performance potential, but the market had shifted. Fuel prices were rising, insurance costs were high, and public sentiment was turning against high-performance cars. By 1972, the decline was evident. The GTO was no longer its own model but reverted to being an option package on the Le Mans again. Sales dropped to fewer than 6,000 units, a shadow of the numbers from the late 1960s. The mechanical specifications, though still impressive, could not overcome the growing pressures from regulations and consumer preferences moving toward economy and comfort. The 400 and 455 engines were detuned further, with power ratings in the 250 to 300 horsepower range under the new net rating system. Even though the engines remained mechanically robust, their character was softened. The 1973 GTO faced even tougher times. The car was redesigned with the new colonnade body style, which introduced heavy bumpers, larger safety glass, and a more formal roofline. These changes increased weight and dulled performance. The most powerful engine available was the 400 V8 producing 230 horsepower, while the optional 455 produced 250. Pontiac attempted to compensate with sportier trim, rally wheels, and a new suspension package, but the magic of the GTO name was fading rapidly. Enthusiasts viewed the car as a shadow of its former self, burdened by federal restrictions and corporate downsizing. Still, Pontiac engineers continued to refine the chassis and handling. The 1973 GTO offered radial tires for the first time, which improved grip and stability, and the suspension geometry was tuned for a more controlled ride. The car handled better than before, but the lack of raw horsepower meant it no longer stood out in the same way. The muscle car era that the GTO had started was coming to an end. By 1974, Pontiac made one last attempt to keep the GTO alive. The name was transferred to the compact Pontiac Ventura platform, a close relative of the Chevrolet Nova. This new GTO was smaller, lighter, and featured a 350 cubic inch V8 producing 200 horsepower. While this version handled well and offered decent performance for its size, it bore little resemblance to the original midsize powerhouse that had defined the 1960s. The styling was conservative, and the public response was lukewarm. Only about 7,000 units were sold, marking the quiet end of the original GTO era. After 1974, the GTO name disappeared from Pontiac's lineup for decades. The automotive world had changed. The oil crisis of 1973, combined with stricter emissions laws and corporate fuel economy standards, ended the age of large displacement performance cars. Pontiac shifted its focus to smaller, more efficient models, though it maintained a performance image with the Trans Am and Firebird series. The GTO name would make a brief and controversial return in 2004 when Pontiac imported the Holden Monaro from Australia and rebadged it as the new GTO. This modern interpretation featured a 5.7-liter LS1 V8 producing 350 horsepower, later upgraded to a 6.0-liter LS2 with 400 horsepower. Technically, it was a superb car, fast, refined, and well-built, but many enthusiasts criticized it for lacking the aggressive styling and personality of the original. It was a capable machine but not the cultural phenomenon that the 1960s GTO had been. The new version lasted until 2006, after which the GTO name was retired once again. Looking back, the Pontiac GTO's legacy is one of bold engineering and unrelenting passion. It was a car born out of defiance, an act of rebellion against corporate policy that turned into a revolution. The engineers behind the first GTO had no idea that they were creating a new automotive category. Yet their vision, combining power, affordability, and youthful image, resonated deeply with a generation. The GTO became the template for every muscle car that followed: the Chevelle SS, the Charger R/T, the Mustang Mach-1, and countless others. Technically, the GTO's success was built on sound engineering principles. Pontiac's V8 engines were known for their durability and tunability. The use of large displacement, efficient carburation, and strong drivetrain components ensured performance that was both reliable and thrilling. The emphasis on chassis balance and braking upgrades also set the GTO apart from competitors who focused only on straight-line acceleration. Pontiac's engineers sought to make a car that could be driven fast and still feel composed, a rare achievement in the muscle car era. In retrospect, the GTO also reflected the broader story of American engineering in the 1960s, a time of optimism, experimentation, and the pursuit of excess. It was an era when horsepower was a measure of national pride and automotive innovation was driven by competition both on the street and in the marketplace. The GTO thrived in that environment because it represented freedom and individuality. Its decline mirrored the end of that golden age, as regulation and practicality replaced performance and style. Today, surviving examples of the 1964 to 1970 GTOs are highly prized among collectors. The tri-power models, Ram Air 4 versions, and original Judges are especially sought after, often commanding six-figure prices in auctions. Restoration specialists continue to rebuild and preserve these machines, not just as vehicles but as symbols of a time when American engineering dared to dream big. Every detail, from the rumble of the exhaust to the curve of the fenders, tells the story of a car that changed the way people thought about performance. The engineering lessons of the GTO remain relevant even now. Its emphasis on power-to-weight ratio, efficient airflow, and robust drivetrain design continues to influence modern performance vehicles. The idea of taking an ordinary platform and turning it into a high-performance machine has become a cornerstone of automotive design philosophy, visible in everything from modern sports sedans to tuned compact cars. In many ways, the Pontiac GTO was both the beginning and the end of an era. It began as a spark of rebellion and ended as a casualty of changing times, but its spirit never truly died. Enthusiasts around the world still celebrate the GTO not just for its speed, but for what it represented: the freedom to innovate without fear, the belief that machines could embody emotion, and the reminder that even forgotten legends can echo forever. The Pontiac GTO stands as one of the greatest engineering statements in American automotive history, a timeless reminder of when horsepower, craftsmanship, and courage converged on the open road.